Hello, and welcome to tonight's episode of Boring Mathematics for Sleep, the show where we gently whisper about big ideas while helping your brain slow down, chill out, and maybe learn a thing or two before you drift off into the statistical dream world. If you're new here, consider subscribing. That way, you can enjoy more mathematical bedtime stories, the kind that are low on drama, high on curiosity, and just cozy enough to lull your logical brain into a gentle slumber. Tonight, we're talking about statistics, and not the kind that require a calculator or a therapy session. We're diving into why so many of the numbers we hear every day are a little misleading, a little exaggerated, or just completely misunderstood. We'll talk about the mythical average person who it turns out doesn't exist. We'll learn why graphs can lie without saying a word. We'll peek into the hilarious, mysterious world of coincidences, medical averages, animal intelligence, and the shocking power of how you phrase a question. Also, pigeons are better at math than you think. Just putting that out there. There will be comforting tangents, silly metaphors, a few eyebrow-raising facts, and hopefully one or two gentle giggles as we unravel why numbers sometimes tell fibs, and why understanding those fibs can actually make you feel better, calmer, and maybe even a little smarter. So settle in, fluff your pillow, maybe wrap yourself in a statistical blanket of curiosity, because tonight we're getting cozy with the curious, misleading, and often misunderstood world of numbers. Now let's begin. There's just something about numbers that feels safe. Like they know what they're doing, like they're wearing glasses and always carry a pen. Numbers walk into a room and people go, "Ah, here comes the truth," which is adorable, but also dangerous. Because numbers might be clean, but the people using them rarely are. Let's say you open your favourite news app. First headline: study finds people who eat more kale are 32% happier. Wow, 32%? That sounds huge. Should I buy kale? Should I eat it raw? Should I cancel my therapist? But wait, what does 32% happier even mean? Happier than what? How was that measured? Was it a survey? Did they just ask people, "Hey, how happy are you on a scale from Tuesday to mashed potato?" Because it matters. A lot. We want numbers to be solid. We want them to be little anchors in the storm. But most numbers are like inflatable pool toys. Fun, colourful, and absolutely not good for navigating reality. Take the phrase, 50% of marriages end in divorce. You've heard that one, right? Classic statistic. Worn out, reliable. Only not true. That number got tossed around in the 1970s during a divorce boom and never left. But it doesn't reflect what's actually happening now. Divorce rates have dropped. Marriage rates have dropped too. And not all marriages are the same. Some people get married 3 times and divorced 3 times. So technically, they're doing most of the statistical heavy lifting. Still, the number survives. Because it's easy to say and scary, which is a magical combo for a viral stat. Here's another. More people are afraid of public speaking than death. Very dramatic, very quotable. But if you dig into the original research, surprise, it was from a survey where people ranked their anxieties. Public speaking ranked high. Death also ranked high. But the conclusion? Someone just looked at the order and made a snappy sentence. That's not statistics. That's improv. But once a number goes viral, it becomes truthy. It gets picked up by self-help books, PowerPoint slides, TED Talks. Before long, it's fact, and no one remembers where it came from. Let's try one more. The average person swallows 8 spiders a year in their sleep. Nope. Total myth. Origin? A joke article meant to prove how easily misinformation spreads. And then it spread. So the very example meant to warn us about fake statistics became a fake statistic. That's how statistics work sometimes. They start out small and silly, and then they go viral, lose their context, and settle into your aunt's Facebook feed forever. Why does this happen? Because our brains love certainty, and numbers feel certain. They feel like truth that came from a calculator instead of a human. It doesn't help that numbers wear fancy clothes. They show up in bar graphs, scatter plots, 3D pie charts with gradients and drop shadows. They look official, they look like they went to college. And in a chaotic world, that's what we want. Something simple, something concrete. So when a headline says 85% of people say, we rarely stop to ask, who are these people? How many were surveyed? What questions were they asked? Were they awake? Because asking all that takes effort and skepticism, and honestly, it's exhausting. It's easier to just nod and repeat the number later like it's gospel. But here's the sleepy truth. Most statistics are less about facts and more about framing, less about reality and more about storytelling. And storytelling with numbers can be just as misleading as storytelling with words, sometimes more so, because it wears a disguise. Numbers don't lie, but they don't always tell the whole truth either. So what do? We pause. We squint at the pie chart. We wonder, who baked this pie and what ingredients did they use? We ask questions like, where did this number come from? What does it really mean? Is it designed to inform me, or impress me, or scare me into buying something? And slowly, gently, we build a little defense against the big, loud world of statistics. Not with cynicism, not with conspiracy theories, but with curiosity, because in the end, that's what makes numbers powerful. Not that they're always right, but that they give us a place to start asking better questions. So next time you hear a stat that feels too clean, too convenient, too perfect, smile, pause, and remember, behind every number is a story, and behind every story is a human doing their best, or occasionally doing their worst. And now that we've gently nudged open the door to the world of misleading numbers, let's take a deeper look at one of the most famous lies in all of statistics. The average person. The mythical average person. Ah yes, the average person. We talk about them like they're real, like they go grocery shopping, wear beige, use coupons. But spoiler alert, they do not exist. Imagine this. You gather 10,000 people, measure their height, weight, income, happiness, eyebrow thickness, number of houseplants, number of dreams about elevators. Then you take the average of each category, boom. You get the average person. Only problem, nobody actually matches that profile. Not even close. Let me introduce you to Tom. Tom is our fictional average man. He's 5'9", weighs 178 pounds, earns $56,000 a year, has 1.7 kids, and eats 3.1 slices of pizza per week. He exists only in data. If you met Tom in real life, he'd be statistically unsettling. Because humans don't come in averages, they come in variation. Here's a true story. In the 1940s, the US Air Force had a problem. Pilots kept crashing. Not because they were bad pilots, but because the cockpits didn't fit them. Naturally, the engineers measured thousands of pilots, everything from arm length to thigh circumference. Then they designed the cockpit for the average pilot. And guess what? That average pilot didn't exist. Out of over 4,000 pilots, not a single one fit the average on all measurements. Not one. The result? They started making adjustable cockpits, which, helped. This is why designing anything for the average is risky, because nobody is actually average across the board. If you're average height, you might not have average shoe size. If you make average income, you probably don't have average savings. And if you watch an average amount of TV, it might be because your cat sits on the remote. The average smooths out all the fun, weird, important stuff. And yet we use averages everywhere. Average test scores, average calorie needs, average sleep time, average number of steps per day, which, let's be honest, is heavily influenced by people with Fitbits and guilt. But here's the twist. The average is often used to create benchmarks. You're told your child is below average in reading, that your weight is above average for your age, that your heart rate is perfectly average. But should we be designing healthcare, education, or happiness based on a person who doesn't even exist? Tom doesn't walk among us. Instead, we should celebrate the outliers. The wonderfully weird, the tall, the short, the fast, the slow, the person who eats 3 pounds of pickles a week and still has great blood pressure. So the next time you hear a number about the average person, just smile, because now you know. The average person is just a fairy tale we use to make sense of a messy world. And honestly, the world is way more interesting without him. How samples can lie. Let's say you want to know what America thinks about pineapple on pizza. You grab a clipboard, put on a brave face, and head to a vegan food truck festival in Portland. Congratulations, you have now created a sample. Is it representative of all Americans? Probably not, but the tofu taco was great. This is how so many misleading statistics are born. Not from bad intentions, but from bad sampling. Let's rewind to 1936. The Literary Digest magazine was a big deal at the time. Rich, fancy, and full of confidence. They mailed out over 2 million surveys to predict who would win the US presidential election, Franklin D. Roosevelt or Alf Landon. 2 million. That's a lot of data. That's enough to make a spreadsheet break into a nervous sweat. The magazine crunched the numbers and declared Landon would win in a landslide. Spoiler, FDR won by a landslide. What went wrong? Sampling. The Literary Digest sent their surveys to people on magazine subscription lists, telephone directories, and car registration databases. In 1936, those were mostly wealthy, upper-middle-class folks. During the Great Depression, not exactly a balanced cross-section of the country. So even with a massive number of responses, the sample was skewed. This is one of the most important lessons in statistics. Size doesn't matter if your sample is broken. It's like trying to measure the average height of a town by surveying only the local basketball team. You'll get a number. It might even be precise, but it won't be right. Now, jump forward to today. Online polls, social media surveys, app reviews. You see the results. 89% of users say this app changed their life. But who are those users? The loud ones, the happy ones, or the very, very angry ones? Most people in the middle don't leave reviews. They just keep scrolling. This is called self-selection bias. When the people who choose to participate are different from the people who don't. Think about it. Who fills out hotel surveys? People who had a magical time, or people who found a toenail in the mini fridge. Everyone else, they're asleep, blissfully unaware of the data war. Let's try another one. Online dating profiles. Imagine a survey that says, most users on this platform love hiking, live music, and meaningful conversation. Okay, but does that mean most people actually love those things? Or just that most people think they sound lovable? Or maybe they just copied that sentence from someone else's bio because it sounded normal and non-threatening. Sampling bias also shows up in medical studies. If a study on a new drug mostly includes white, middle-aged men from one city, how do we know it works for older women, or teenagers, or people who eat nothing but peanut butter? We don't. And sometimes we don't even ask. Even political polls suffer. If a poll calls landlines at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, who's home to answer? Not teenagers, not people working double shifts, probably not anyone who has a TikTok account. And yet, those answers become America's opinion. Here's the thing. No sample is perfect, but good researchers know that. They disclose their limitations. They include margins of error. They try to adjust. Bad statistics, on the other hand, hide their sample behind a bold number. 95% of people agree? Cool. 95% of which people? How many? When were they asked? Were they conscious? Sampling is hard. Truly random samples are like unicorns that pay taxes, but we can do better than guessing based on whoever filled out the first 10 comment cards. So next time you see a stat that sounds confident, just whisper to yourself, "What's the sample?" Because a statistic without context is just a story, and stories are lovely, but not all of them are true. Now take a deep breath. You've just survived another statistical illusion, and you did it without even needing a calculator. Coming up next, tiny risks, big reactions, and why your brain freaks out about sharks more than slippery bathroom floors.
Tiny risks, big reactions. Let's talk about sharks. They're terrifying, right? Giant teeth, cold eyes, theme music. If a shark shows up in a movie, someone is definitely getting bitten. So it makes sense that many people rank shark attacks as a top fear. They avoid the ocean, they peek nervously into swimming pools. Some even flinch near bathtubs. But statistically, you're more likely to be killed by a vending machine. Seriously, falling vending machines cause more deaths each year than sharks. So does slipping in the bathroom. So does getting hit by a coconut. So does, well, almost everything. But our brains don't care. Our brains are like, yeah, but sharks. Why? Because our risk perception isn't based on numbers. It's based on emotion, on stories, on how vivid something is in our mind. Sharks are vivid. They're dramatic. They come with soundtracks. Falling in the shower? Not so much. No one writes movies about shampoo-based fatalities. This is called the availability heuristic. It's a fancy name for the idea that we estimate the likelihood of something based on how easily we can recall an example. So if you see a plane crash on the news, suddenly flying feels risky. If your cousin's neighbor's friend had a bad reaction to a vaccine, suddenly all vaccines feel terrifying. If one celebrity goes bankrupt from buying too many alpacas, you might start side-eyeing alpacas. It's not logical, but it's very human. Now let's talk about percentages. You hear something like, this activity increases your risk of death by 100%. Yikes, that sounds terrible. Until you learn that the base risk was 1 in 10 million. So now it's 2 in 10 million. Still tiny, just slightly less tiny. But most people don't hear the base rate. They just hear 100% increase and freak out. That's how news headlines work. They maximize drama and minimize context. Risk of heart disease doubles with this breakfast food. What they don't tell you is that the risk goes from point, and also you probably weren't eating 12 pounds of bacon every morning anyway. But that's not as exciting to print. We're wired to care more about relative risk, how much it increases, than absolute risk, what it increases from. So marketers use this. Health gurus use this. Even scientists, when they want to make their findings look impressive, use this. Which is why it's so important to pause and ask, compared to what? Another example, driving. People worry about flying. Turbulence makes your coffee jump, and suddenly you're planning your will. But driving, totally normal. Chill music, fast food, daydreaming. Except cars are far more dangerous than planes. Statistically, the drive to the airport is riskier than the flight itself. But flying feels weird, unnatural. You're not in control, and if something goes wrong, it goes very wrong. So our perception of risk gets warped. Here's a good bedtime question. What's something you fear that's actually rare? And what's something common that you ignore? Are you afraid of elevators but skip seatbelts in the back seat? Do you microwave leftovers with reckless abandon but triple check the expiration date on salt? It's okay. We all do it. Risk isn't just about numbers. It's about attention, emotion, and whatever the last documentary you watched told you. But being aware of this quirk in our brains helps. It helps us see that sometimes the scariest things are just shadows on the wall. And the real dangers, they're often quiet, unassuming, like forgetting to sleep, or skipping water, or replying sure to an email you didn't understand. So next time you hear a scary statistic, pause, ask, what's the real risk? What's the base rate? Am I reacting with fear or with facts? And maybe, just maybe, you'll worry a little less. Not because the world is safe, but because you understand it a little better. Coming up next, how numbers can tell two totally different stories, depending on how you frame them. Framing. Same numbers, different feeling. Imagine this. You go to the doctor, and they say, you have a 90% chance of surviving this procedure. You breathe a sigh of relief. That sounds great. Solid odds. Definitely better than Vegas. Now imagine the same doctor saying, there's a 10% chance you won't make it. Yikes. It's the exact same statistic, but it feels wildly different. That's the power of frame. Numbers may be cold and logical, but the way we present them, full of drama. Marketers, politicians, health experts, they all know this trick. It's not about what the number is, it's about how it's wrapped. Would you rather buy a burger that's 80% lean, or one that's 20%? They're the same thing, but one sounds healthy and gym-friendly. The other sounds like it comes with a side of shame. Framing changes how we feel, and feelings change our decisions. Here's a fun one. Imagine you're told that a product has a failure rate of 5%. Not ideal. That's 1 out of 20 breaking down or exploding, or disappearing into a cloud of regret. Now what if the same product is marketed as 95% reliable? Suddenly you're like, wow, that's practically trustworthy. Same number, different vibe. Framing is everywhere. In politics you'll hear, taxes were cut by 10%. That sounds amazing, until you find out your bracket didn't change at all. But billionaires got a huge break. Or crime is down 5% since last year. Down from what? A massive spike? A minor blip? Were more crimes being reported? Or fewer happening? Or how about when a study says, people who drink green tea are 12% less likely to get the flu? Sounds good, but how was the study done? Did they account for people who also sleep well and exercise? Or were they just measuring people who drink green tea and hope for the best? Sometimes the framing is visual, like
if you want to make a small change look big, just shrink the scale. If you want to make a big change look tiny, stretch it out. Imagine a graph that starts the y-axis at 90 instead of 0. Suddenly a 2% drop looks like a cliff dive. Now flip it, start at 0, and it looks like a peaceful glide down a grassy hill. And we eat this stuff up because we trust visuals, we trust numbers, and we especially trust visuals with numbers. Let's not forget pie charts. Oh, sweet delicious pie charts. They look clean, professional, but if the slices aren't labeled clearly, you could be comparing apples to oranges, or worse, apples to donut holes. Even words can sneak in framing. Saying only versus a full makes a big difference. Only 3% of people succeeded versus a full 3% of people made it. Are we depressed or impressed? Depends entirely on tone. So how do we fight back? Start by flipping the frame. If you hear a positive stat, ask what the negative version would be. If you hear a negative one, do the same. Then ask yourself, is the framing trying to inform me or sell me something? Sometimes just flipping the language is enough to expose the trick, because in the end, a stat without context is just a story in costume, and costumes are great for Halloween, but not for decision making. So next time a number feels too good or too scary to be true, pause, take off the costume, and see what's underneath. Coming up next, why top 10 lists might be fun, but not exactly statistically sound. The cult of rankings. Everyone loves a top 10 list. Top 10 places to live, top 10 baby names, top 10 countries for happiness, top 10 toothpaste flavors. Okay, maybe not that last one. Rankings feel comforting. They give us a sense of order in a messy world, a way to measure what's best without thinking too hard. But let's peek behind the curtain. Take the annual ranking of best cities to live in. Sounds scientific, right? But what metrics are they using? Cost of living, weather, number of dog parks per capita, median coffee foam thickness. Different groups prioritize different things. If you hate the cold, no amount of walkability will convince you to move to Minneapolis. Sometimes the criteria are just weird.
like ranking countries based on how many museums they have, without accounting for how many people actually go to museums, or ranking schools based on average test scores, which might reflect more about the neighborhood's income than the school itself. And let's not even start on top 10 most beautiful celebrities. There is no mathematical formula for cheekbones. Trust me, rankings also hide something else: the gap between places. Cities AN1 and cities AN2 might be almost identical, but when you see the list, AN1 feels way better. Even if the only real difference was that cities AN1 has slightly faster Wi-Fi and coffee shop, and once a list is out there, people start chasing it. Cities campaign to climb the rankings. Companies adjust their marketing. Suddenly the list isn't just describing reality, it's shaping it. Let's say a college ranks low in prestige, so fewer students apply, so they get less funding, so they drop further, and now it looks like the ranking was right. This is called a self-fulfilling prophecy, a fancy term for fake it until it becomes sort of real. Even fun, harmless lists can be misleading, like those which state drinks the most iced coffee article. They're based on data from a single app, or one store chain, or vibes, but they get clicks, because we love seeing where we rank. Sometimes rankings feel personal, like when a new study declares that your favorite movie is the 17th most overrated film of all time, and suddenly you're in a shouting match with a stranger on the internet, named Carl, who has a profile picture of a raccoon. So next time you see a ranking, ask yourself, who made this list? What were they measuring? Who benefits from being at the top? And is this list telling me something useful, or just something clickable? Because while it's fun to know that your city has the third highest number of indie bookstores per capita, it probably doesn't change your Tuesday. Numbers can be beautiful, rankings can be fun, but reality, it's messier, more personal, and not easily sorted into neat little lists. Coming up next, the mysterious world of p-values and why they make science weirdly competitive, p-hacking, and publication bias. Now we dive into the glamorous, high-stakes world of scientific publish. Don't fall asleep just yet. Imagine you're a researcher. You've spent months, maybe years, studying whether playing the kazoo improves memory in retired dentists. Your university gave you a tiny grant. Your friends stopped inviting you to party. You're running on instant noodles and the hope of publishing in a fancy journal. You crunch the numbers and nothing. No effect. Just a bunch of dentists humming off key and forgetting where they put their car keys. So, what do? Well, if you're ethical and chill, you publish your results anyway, because knowing what doesn't work is also valuable. But here's the twist. Journals don't love boring results. They want excitement, big discoveries, headlines like kazoos cure Alzheimer's. Not kazoos do nothing except annoy lab assistants. So some researchers, not you of course, start p-hacking. What's p-hacking? It's when you dig through your data like a raccoon in a garbage can, looking for anything statistically significant, change a few parameters, slice the data differently, exclude that one weird dentist who also juggles. Suddenly boom, PPL, just under the magical 0.05 threshold. Congratulations, you have a significant result. Never mind that it might be random, or meaningless, or based on 11 people and a parrot. The p-value is a measure of probability. Specifically, the chance that your results would occur if nothing was actually going on. And 0.05 has become this arbitrary line in the sand. Below it, publishable; above it, into the recycling bin of science. And that's a problem, because it means researchers are incentivized, consciously or not, to find something significant, even if it's just a statistical fluke dressed in a lab coat. Now let's talk about publication bias. Imagine 20 studies are done on whether sneezing makes you smart. One finds a positive result. 19 find nothing. Which one gets published? The exciting one. The one that says, sneezing boosts IQ by 7 points. Now Google it. And what do you find? That one study. Suddenly everyone's snorting pepper for brain power. This is how the scientific literature can get skewed. Not because researchers are evil, but because the system rewards novelty and punishes null results. And the result? You get waves of studies that seem to contradict each other. Eggs are good, eggs are bad, coffee is a superfood, coffee is toxic sludge. It's confusing, and it makes people lose trust. But most scientists are doing their best. They're under pressure. They're human, and sometimes the system makes it hard to be perfectly honest without becoming perfectly unpublic. So next time you see a flashy new study, ask, was this replicated? Who funded it? How big was the sample? And was the p-value treated like a magic ticket to publication? Because good science is slow, it's careful, and sometimes it says we don't know yet. And that might not make headlines, but it does make truth. Coming up next, why winning the lottery isn't as magical as it seems, and how math explains your weirdest coincidence.
The math of miracles. Let's talk about miracles, or, as mathematicians call them, inevitable surprises. You buy a lottery ticket. The next day you win. Everyone calls it a miracle. But is it? Let's do the math. Millions of people buy lottery tickets every week. Someone has to win. If you ran a lottery every day for 1,000 years, you'd eventually get a story like, she picked the same numbers as her grandma dreamed about during a solar eclipse. Sounds magical, but with enough tries even the weirdest outcome becomes likely. This is known as the law of truly large numbers. If you give randomness enough chances, strange things will happen. Not because the universe is sending signs, but because math is weird, and also kind of poetic. Take the birthday paradox. In a room of just 23 people, there's a better than 50% chance that two share a birthday. Does that mean they're secretly long-lost twins? Nope. It just means we underestimate how quickly probabilities add up. Your brain says, there are 365 days and only 23 people. The odds must be low. But your brain is thinking about your birthday matching someone else's. The paradox is about any two people in the group. There are 253 possible pairs. That's a lot of chances. Coincidences feel magical because they're emotionally sticky. You dream about a giraffe, and the next morning your neighbor is walking a dog wearing a giraffe costume. You feel like the universe is winking at you. But here's the deal. You have dozens of dreams. You see hundreds of things every day. Occasionally those things will overlap, not because they're connected, just because you're alive and paying attention. Imagine tossing a deck of cards in the air every day, for a year. Sooner or later they'll land in some odd pattern. Maybe all the red cards clump together, maybe a smiley face. You'll call it meaningful. But really it's just randomness doing its thing. Now randomness doesn't mean equal, it doesn't mean fair, it means unpredictable. And unpredictable stuff often looks very patterned, at least for a while. Like flipping a coin and getting heads 6 times in a row. That feels spooky. But it's not impossible, it's just improbable. And in a big enough sample the improbable happens all the time. That's why casinos stay in business. People see a roulette wheel land on black 6 times, and bet on red, thinking, it's due. But the wheel has no memory, it doesn't care, it's not keeping score. Neither is the universe. This is where magical thinking creeps in. We want stories, we crave meaning, so we look at random noise and hear a song. That's not bad. It's human. It's what makes us artists and poets and conspiracy theorists. But sometimes it leads us to overestimate how rare something really is. Like hearing about 2 people named Nigel, who both grew up in the same town, both married women named Janet, and both work in plumbing. That's weird, no doubt. But there are thousands of Nigel. Some percentage of them are bound to have eerie overlaps. And once a story like that goes viral, it gets amplified. You don't hear about all the totally normal Nigels out there living statistically dull lives. So the next time you hear someone say, what are the odds? You can smile and say, higher than you think. Miracles are real, but not because they break the rules. They happen because the rules, the math, allow for more wonder than we realize. Coming up next, Monty Hall, base rate fallacies, and why your gut instincts are often terrible at probabilities. The Monty Hall problem and other paradoxes. Let's play a game. There are 3 doors. Behind one is a car. Behind the other 2, goats. You pick door. The host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door down 3, and there's a goat. Then he turns to you and says, do you want to switch to door down 2? Most people say nah, doesn't matter. But here's the kicker, it does matter, and switching gives you a better chance of winning. Why? Because when you picked your first door, you had a 1 in 3 chance.
That means there was a 2 in 3 chance the prize was behind one of the other 2 doors. When the host shows you a goat behind one of those doors, he's giving you new information. That 2 in 3 probability doesn't get evenly split. It transfers to the other unopened door. So now, Doordan 2 has a 2 in 3 chance. Doordan 1 is still stuck at 1 in 3. You should switch. But most people stick. Because it feels weird. It feels like the odds are now, and our brains love symmetry. This is just one of many paradoxes where human intuition completely fails at math. Let's talk base rate fallacy. Say there's a disease that affects 1 in 10,000 people. You take a test that's 99% accurate. You test positive. Should you panic? Most people would, but let's walk through it. Out of 10,000 people, 1 actually has the disease. The test will correctly identify that 1. But 1% of the 9,999 healthy people, that's about 100 people, will also test positive falsely. So now you have 100 positive results. 1 real, 100 false. Your odds of actually having the disease. About 1 in 100%. That's less than 1%. This is why understanding base rates is so important. Without them, we overreact to rare events and treat them like certainties. It happens all the time in news, medicine, even sport. Someone gets a rare diagnosis, and everyone panics. A player has one great game, and suddenly they're MVP material. Our brains are bad at odds. We like stories, we like feelings, and feelings do not care about statistical significance. Here's another classic, Simpson's paradox. A university has 2 departments. Department A admits 80% of applicants. Department B admits 30%. But when you look at total admissions, it turns out that men were admitted at a higher rate than women. How? Because most women applied to the tougher department. Most men applied to the easier one. When you break down the data by department, the bias disappears. But in total it looks like there's bias. This paradox shows how group-level data can tell a different story than subgroup data, which is a fancy way of saying averages can lie. We'll come back to, but for now just know this, math is full of paradoxes, and your gut, it's full of spaghetti.
Coming up next, coincidences that aren't coincidences, and why the weirdest events are actually pretty normal. When coincidences aren't, you think of a friend you haven't talked to in years, and bam, they text you. You're humming a song in your head, and then it plays in a cafe. You dream of a red balloon, and the next day there's one floating down your street. Coincidence? Definitely. But not as rare as it feels. Welcome to the fuzzy math of everyday magic. We live in a world bursting with moments. You experience thousands of tiny events every single day. Faces, names, numbers, ads, dreams, radio songs, colors, feelings, smells. Every once in a while, a few of those line up. And when they do, our brains light up like a slot machine that just hit 3 cherries. It feels amazing, like the universe is nodding at you, like there's a secret pattern only you can see. But the real pattern, it's you noticing patterns. This is called apophenia, the human tendency to find meaningful connections in random data. It's what gives us conspiracy theories, horoscopes, and that feeling that your toast is staring back at you. It's not that coincidences are fake. They're very real, but they're also inevitable. Imagine if you flipped a coin, somewhere in there you'll get a streak of 8 or 9 heads in a row. It'll feel weird. You'll start wondering if the coin is haunted, but the math says that streaks happen, not because something's rigged, but because randomness loves to bunch things up. Same goes for real life. Have you ever met someone who shares your birthday? Statistically, you probably have. It's not that unusual. In fact, in a room of just 23 people, there's a 50% chance that 2 of them will share a birthday. That's the birthday paradox again. Small group, big coincidence potential. Or how about this? You dream about an old movie, and the next day it's mentioned in a podcast. Spooky. But how many dreams do you have that don't connect to anything? How many podcasts do you hear where nothing strange happens? The rare ones stand out. The boring ones get forgotten. There's also the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon.
When you learn about something new and then suddenly you see it everywhere. You decide to learn about bees. Now bees are in your newsfeed, on book covers, in casual conversation. You weren't being followed by bees, you just tuned in. Coincidences are stories we tell ourselves, and like all good stories, they stick when they're surprising, emotional, or just plain weird. But that doesn't make them mystical. It makes them human. We're pattern hunters, connection seekers. We'd rather believe in fate than random. It's cozier. It makes us feel less alone. But the truth is, randomness isn't cold. It's just big and generous. It hands out coincidences to everyone, all the time. You just have to be paying attention. So next time something strange happens, you see your own name on a coffee cup, hear a joke twice in one day, or spot a squirrel doing yoga, smile. You just won the statistical lottery of weird. Coming up next, why spurious correlations are hilarious, and how ice cream might cause shark attacks, depending on how lazy your math is, confounding variables and correlation versus causation. Let's start with a classic. People who eat more ice cream are more likely to get attacked by sharks. Sounds terrifying. Also sounds like a good reason to cancel summer. But wait, what's really happening? More people eat ice cream in the summer. More people swim in the ocean in the summer. More people in the water means more chances for shark encounters. Ice cream didn't summon the shark, summer did. That's a confounding variable, a hidden third factor messing with your data. It's everywhere. Kids who sleep with the light on are more likely to grow up nearsighted. But is the lamp to blame? No. Turns out nearsightedness runs in families, and so does turning on a nightlight, because your parents are also nearsighted. Ice cream, lamps, sharks. None of them are guilty. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is why correlation does not imply causation. Should be printed on every news headline, diet book, and clickbait study ever written. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. It's like saying whenever I wear my lucky socks, my team wins. Or are you just ignoring all the times they lost? People love finding connections, and sometimes those connections are hilarious. There's a website called Spurious Correlations that charts things like US spending on science and suicides by hanging. They track almost identically. Are scientists somehow responsible? Of course not. It's nonsense. Beautiful, statistically sound nonsense. One chart even shows a correlation between the number of Nicolas Cage movies and swimming pool drownings. But these charts prove a point. With enough data, you can find something that matches up, especially if you're not picky about logic. Sometimes the causal direction is backward, like a study that finds people who take more vitamins are healthier. Maybe healthy people are just more likely to care about vitamins. The cause and effect flipped. Or maybe there's a hidden third cause, like income. People with more money can afford vitamins and gym memberships, and therapists who specialize in deep tissue trauma from childhood dodgeball games. The more variables you have, the messier it gets. This is why real scientists use control groups, randomization, and mountains of caution, because it's easy to get tricked by patterns. Even when you're wearing your thinking cap, especially when you're wearing your I read one article cap. So the next time you hear that X causes Y, pause. Ask, is there a hidden variable? And most importantly, is this just another ice cream and sharks situation? Coming up next, let's leave the humans behind and dive into the surprisingly nerdy world of animal statistics. Because even pigeons have opinion. Statistics in the animal kingdom. Let's talk about pigeons. They walk like they're late for a meeting. They bob their heads like they're agreeing with everything you say, and they have one more thing going for them. They're surprisingly good at statistics. In experiments, pigeons have learned to recognize patterns, respond to probabilities, and even predict outcomes better than some undergraduates. Let that sink in. Somewhere out there, a bird is beating Chad at statistical reasoning. Why does this happen? Because pigeons don't overthink. They don't have cognitive biases like humans do. They just peck buttons. And when they peck the right ones, they get snacks. Turns out, that's a great way to learn statistics. Let's move on to bees. Bees can communicate through dance, the waggle dance to be specific. When a bee finds a good source of nectar, it returns to the hive and does a little boogie to show the direction and distance of the flowers. You might think this is just nature being adorable, but it's actually complex information encoding. Angle, duration, tempo, it's all there. The bee is basically drawing a graph in the air with its butt. Then you have crows. Crows can count. They recognize faces. They use tools. Some researchers gave them statistical problems to solve, like choosing the better of two jars with different ratios of treats. The crows picked the better odds. Do they understand probability? Not like we do, but they learn from experience. They notice patterns. They adjust behavior based on outcomes. And honestly, that's more than most of us do when gambling. Even rats can outperform humans in certain probability tasks. When humans are given a test with two options, one right 70% of the time, one right 30%. Most people try to outguess the system. They switch back and forth, looking for a deeper pattern. Rats? Rats just pick the 70% option every time. They win more, because they're not looking for a secret. They're just doing the math. There's a lesson here. Intelligence doesn't always mean complexity. Sometimes it means keeping it simple. Even your dog, yes, your fluffy zoomy-prone dog, is making calculations. Studies have shown dogs can estimate quantity like knowing which bowl has more treats. And they learn from experience faster than we give them credit for. Now, do animals know they're doing statistics? No. They're not writing dissertations on sample size, but they interact with the world in a probabilistic way. Trial and error, pattern recognition, outcome tracking, and that at its core is what statistics is all about. So next time you mess up your fantasy football predictions or misread a weather forecast, don't feel bad. You're not worse than a pigeon. You're just human. Coming up next, why averages in medicine can be dangerous, and why your normal might not be normal at all. The danger of averages in medicine. Let's talk about the average patient. Sounds harmless, right? Doctors say things like average blood pressure, average heart rate, or average response to treatment. It feels scientific, objective, safe. But here's the thing. Average doesn't mean normal, and it definitely doesn't mean you. Back in the 1940s, the US Air Force had a problem. Pilots were crashing planes, not because they were bad at flying, but because the cockpits were designed for the average pilot. Researchers measured thousands of pilots on 10 different body dimensions: height, torso length, arm span, leg length, you name it. Then they built cockpits to fit the average of all those numbers. Turns out, nobody fit that average. Not one pilot had average measurements on all 10 dimensions. The cockpits were perfectly suited for a person who didn't exist. Once they adjusted the design for variability instead of averages, crashes plummeted. That's medicine in a nutshell. What works on average might not work for you, or your grandma, or your neighbor Bob, who insists kombucha cured his asthma. Let's say a medication works for 7. Sounds good, right? But that means it does nothing for 30%. And you don't know which group you're in until you try. Or take body temperature. We've all been told it's 98.6 per ppf, 37 degrees, but that number is based on data from the 1800s. And newer studies show the real average is lower. Also, it varies by time of day, age, gender, and whether you just ran to catch the bus. Same goes for cholesterol, BMI, blood sugar. They're all based on population averages, but individual variation is huge. And don't get me started on BMI. It was invented by a Belgian astronomer who thought it was a good way to measure general population trends, not individual health. Yet here we are, using it to make medical decisions. Average can be misleading. It can make healthy people worrying. It can make sick people feel reassured when they shouldn't. This is why personalized medicine is becoming a big deal. With genetic data, lifestyle tracking, and wearable tech, doctors can move beyond what usually works and start asking what works for you. But until that becomes the norm, remember, the average patient is a statistical ghost. Your health is real, and being outside the average doesn't mean you're abnormal. It means you're specific, complicated, wonderfully difficult to categorize, which, honestly, is what makes being human so statistically beautiful. Coming up next, why big data sometimes leads to big nonsense, and how algorithms get weird when they try too hard to predict your every move.
Big data, big drama. Let's talk about big data. The buzzword, the hype machine, the thing that promises to know everything about you, sometimes before you do. your playlists, your shopping cart, your sleep cycle, your step count. Big data hoovers it all up, like a nosy Roomba. And then what? Then it tries to make predictions. Algorithms whisper to advertisers, this person clicked on one hiking boot, sell them 12 more. At its best, big data helps spot patterns that humans miss, like predicting flu outbreaks from search terms or helping farmers know exactly when to water crops. That's cool. But at its worst, it's creepy and wrong, and sometimes hilarious. Like the time Target figured out a teenage girl was pregnant before her dad did, just based on her buying unscented lotion and vitamins. That led to an awkward family moment at the checkout counter. Or when a streaming service recommended horror movies to someone just because they watched a documentary with a scary sounding narrator. Big data is powerful, but it has a flaw. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't know you bought that baby monitor as a gift, or that you binge-watched 10 episodes of baking shows while heartbroken, not because you were starting a cupcake business. It's also vulnerable to overfitting, a fancy way of saying, it learned too much from the wrong detail. Imagine teaching an algorithm to recognize cats by showing it 10,000 cat photos. Great. But what if all those cats were photographed on blue rugs? The algorithm might learn blue rug, cat, show it a cat on a green couch, and it freaks out. Same thing happens with people. Maybe it decides you're likely to default on a loan because your zip code matches past defaulters, or that your resume isn't a good fit because you didn't attend a certain school. Algorithms aren't neutral. They reflect the data they're trained on, and that data is full of human bias, which leads to algorithmic drama. Job applications filtered by bots that reject you because of a keyword, credit scores adjusted based on your internet habits, insurance quotes impacted by your Instagram likes, all wrapped up in a tidy little score that no human can fully explain. Big data also leads to something called datafication, turning human experiences into numbers just because we can. How many steps did you take? How productive were you? How much sleep did you get? And was it good quality sleep? Or the sad, restless sleep of someone who drank coffee at 4 p.m. It's helpful until it isn't. Until it makes you feel like your life is just a dashboard. We crave measurement because it gives us a sense of control. But measurement isn't meaning. Not everything valuable can be counted. And not everything counted is valuable. Big data can do amazing things. But it also needs boundaries, checks, humanity, because behind all the numbers is a person. With quirks and contradictions that no algorithm will ever fully capture. Coming up next, why saying most people means almost nothing, and how vague stats sneak into our brains without asking. Why most people means nothing. You've heard it before. Most people don't know. Most people think pineapple doesn't belong on pizza. But who are these most people exactly? Are they your neighbors? People online? 5 folks at a bus stop? Or just the one loud guy at the party who uses most people to win arguments? Most people is a vague statistical shortcut. It sounds scientific, authoritative, but often it's based on vibes, not data. Take headlines like most Americans believe aliens have visited Earth. That might come from one online poll with 500 respondents who clicked yes between ads for herbal brain supplements. That's not science. That's a group of bored insomniacs with strong alien opinions. Even when surveys are legit, they're limited. Who did they ask? How did they ask? Was it a phone survey? An online form? Did it include grandma, your cousin who lives in the woods, and that guy who only speaks in memes? Then there's self-selection bias. The people who care enough to answer surveys are not always representative of the general population. They're usually the ones with strong opinions, too much free time, or a suspicious number of cats. Also, phrasing matters. Ask people, do you support freedom of choice? And you get one answer. Ask, do you support allowing dangerous substances in communities? And you get the opposite. Same topic, different spin. Politicians, marketers, and news outlets love most people because it lets them speak with authority, without offering proof. Most people want lower taxes. Most people support this new app that tracks your sleep and dreams about and suddenly you feel left out. Like you're the only one who doesn't think sleep soup is the future. But here's the truth. Most people is often a stand-in for a group of people I agree with. Real data is specific, messy, sometimes boring, but on. So next time you hear most people, ask, Dake, according to what? From which survey? When was it taken? Who was asked? Because most people might be nobody, or everybody, or just Carl from accounting. Coming up next, how graphs can lie without saying a single word, and why the prettiest charts are often the most misleading.
How graphs lie without saying a word. Graphs. Those sleek, colourful, sciencey looking things. They're supposed to help us understand complex ideas at a glance. And sometimes they do, but other times they lie, quietly, elegantly, with a straight face and a charming little data label. Let's say a company shows a bar chart of their profits. One bar is way taller than last year's. We've doubled revenue, they say. What they don't mention is that the y-axis doesn't start at 0. It starts at 95, so a tiny increase looks huge. It's not technically false, but it's emotionally misleading. That's the art of graphical deceit. Or take a pie chart. Everyone loves a pie chart. It's a circle. It's got colours. Sometimes there's actual pie involved, but some pie charts are overloaded with tiny slivers. Too many categories, too little distinction. It ends up looking like a game of Trivial Pursuit melted in the sun. Then there's 3D charts. Don't get us started. 3D charts distort perception. They're hard to read. They look cool but say less. They're the cargo pants of data visualization. Too many pockets. Not enough usefulness. Here's a classic trick. Truncating the axis. If you're plotting temperature changes and you zoom in on the y-axis, a small change looks dramatic. Great for clickbait, terrible for context, or using misleading intervals, like showing data by decade, then suddenly switching to yearly to make a spike look bigger. Even color choice matters. Red suggests danger. Green suggests growth. You can steer perception just by changing the palette. One of the biggest lies, correlation graphs without explanation. You see two lines rising together, say coffee consumption and squirrel attacks. Looks connected, but the labels are vague and there's no context. Congratulations, you've just been graph baited. Now some graphs lie on purpose, but most are just badly made, or made in a hurry, or made by someone who thought Excel's default settings were trustworthy. Spoiler, they're not. The truth is, our brains love visual shortcuts. We trust images more than numbers, so when a graph looks clean and professional, we assume the information is too. But graphs are like tweets. They only tell part of the story. Want to protect yourself? Always check the axes. Look at the scale. Ask what's missing. And most importantly, ask who made the graph and why. Because just like words, graphs can be edited, cropped, spun, and weaponized. A good graph reveals truth. A bad graph just makes truth look pretty. Coming up next, why we crave certainty, and how statistical confidence is more about comfort than correctness. The false comfort of certainty. Let's be honest. Certainty feels amazing. It's warm, it's reassuring. It's like a cozy weighted blanket for your brain. We love certainty so much that we'll cling to it even when it's made of smoke and statistics. Especially statistics. Because when someone says there's an 80% chance of rain, or a 95% effective vaccine, or a 70% risk reduction, we nod like we understand, like these numbers are promises, but they're not. They're probabilities. And probabilities are just math speak for, we're not sure, but here's our best guess. Here's where it gets interesting, and a little uncomfortable. Even when we know that certainty is an illusion, we still reach for it. Take weather forecast. When your phone says 30% chance of rain, what does that even mean? Most people think it means it'll rain on 30% of the area, or 30% of the time, or that the weather gods are rolling dice. But what it really means, depending on the forecast model, is that in similar situations in the past, it rained 30% of the time. That's not a prediction, it's a pattern. Same goes for medical statistics. A doctor says, this treatment has an 80% success rate. Sounds rock solid, but for you it's binary. It either works or it doesn't. There's no 80% healing. You don't wake up partially cured. Statistics deal in groups, populations, averages, but life happens to individuals. And here's the kicker. Even scientists get this wrong. There's something called a confidence interval in statistics. It tells you how certain a result is within a range. Say a study finds a drug lowers blood pressure by 10 points, with a 95% confidence interval of faith through. That means the real effect is likely between 7 and 30. But many people, even researchers, misread this as we're 95% sure the effect is 10 points. Nope, that's not how it works. We crave precision, so we oversimplify. We crave certainty, so we overtrust. This is how marketers sell us on clinically proven products. How politicians promise exact results from vague plans. How news headlines turn may reduce into cures. Because nuance doesn't trend, certainty does. And yet the world is fuzzy, uncertain, full of unknowns. We use stats and probabilities to cope with that, to feel like we have a grip on things, to tame the chaos. It's understandable, but it's also a trap. When we treat uncertainty as failure, we miss the beauty of good science, which is full of uncertainty. That's the good science says, here's what we found, and here's how sure we are. Bad science says, this is the answer. Full stop. Confidence is not the same as certainty, and acknowledging uncertainty doesn't make someone weak. It makes them honest. Let's go back to your brain under a weighted blanket. You're cozy, you're sure, but outside the weather's changing. The world is shifting, and that's okay. You can keep the blanket. Just don't let it block your view. Because understanding probabilities, truly understanding them, means making peace with being unsure. It means asking better questions, being a little more patient, and learning to live in the maybe. And that's a kind of wisdom certainty can't touch. Coming up next, percentages that sound scary, sound hopeful, or sound completely made up, and how they're used to bend your brain.
Dangerous percentages.
Percentages.
The tiny numbers that carry huge emotional weight. Cuts your risk by 50%. Boost performance by 300%. Only a 1% chance of failure. These statements grab your attention. They sound precise, scientific, comforting, or terrifying. But here's the twist. Percentages are sneaky. They're one of the most powerful tools in the manipulation toolbox, because they look like facts but behave like poetry. Let's say a headline screams, "This new pill cuts your cancer risk by 50%. That sounds incredible, but dig deeper. The absolute risk of getting that specific cancer was 2 in 1,000. The pill reduced it to 1 in 1,000. That's a 50% relative risk reduction. But the absolute risk reduction, just 0.1%. That's the difference between huge news and meh. Relative risk is often used to impress. Absolute risk is often ignored, because it sounds boring. But if you're trying to decide whether to take that pill, the absolute risk is the one you actually care about. It's not just health. This shows up in finance, marketing, even politics. A company says, "Our new algorithm improves accuracy by 15%. Cool, from what to what? If it went from 10% to 11.5%, we're not throwing a parade, but they don't mention that part. Or politicians say crime is up but if there were 2 crimes last year and 6 this year, yes, that's a 200% increase. But also, it's still just 6 crimes. Perspective matters. Sometimes the numbers are technically true but emotionally misleading. Ever seen a product that says now with 33% more? More than what? More than yesterday? More than the sad little sample you gave your cat last week? Without context, percentages are just confetti. They dazzle, but they don't inform. Then there's the issue of base rates. A medical test that's 99% accurate sounds great, but if the condition it's testing for is super rare, say 1 in 10,000, most positives will still be false alarms. That's because the base rate is so low. Here's a fun mental trick marketers love: the percentage increase illusion. Let's say a phone battery lasts 10 hours. A new model claims 20% longer battery life. That's 12 hours, right? Now imagine another phone goes from 30 hours to 36 hours. That's also 6 extra hours. But only a 20% increase sounds exciting on the 10-hour model. On the 30-hour model they might say 6 more hours instead. It's the same improvement, but the way you say it changes the emotional impact. There's also the inverse.
percentage decrease. Say your bill goes up 10% one year, then down 10% the next. You might think you're back to where you started. Nope, math doesn't work that way. Start with a 10% increase takes you to 11. A 10% decrease brings you to 99. You're down $1. Oops. These little quirks of math get missed all the time by the media, by marketers, even by scientists who should know better. Percentages are so common we stop questioning them. But the truth is, every percentage has a backstory. Where did it come from? What's the context? What's the denominator? Saying only 5% of users reported a problem sounds great, but how many users were surveyed? Was it 5 out of 100, 1 out of 20, 5 out of 10? And how do you define a problem? If I downloaded the app, used it once and deleted it in silent rage, did that count? Here's another trick. Double your chances. Sounds dramatic, but double of what? If your chance was 0.001%, doubling it brings you to neuro, but it sounds bigger. Or the flip side, cuts your risk in half. Same illusion, if your original risk was almost nothing, halving it still leaves you with almost nothing. These statements are technically correct and deeply misleading, but because our brains are wired to react to percentages, we get sucked in. We like simple stories. Big numbers ease big impact. Small numbers, small risk. But reality, it's weirder, trickier, more new. A product can be 80% effective and still leave out vital details, like how it was tested, who it was tested on, and what effective even means. Was it peer-reviewed? Were side effects measured? Was it tested in real-world conditions? Or just in a lab where nobody sneezed? The next time you see a percentage, pause, ask what's the base rate? Is this relative or absolute? Compared to what? Who's telling me this and what do they want me to feel? Because that's the thing. Percentages aren't just data, they're persuasion tool. They don't just show you information, they frame it, spin it, tilt your perception just enough to make a number feel bigger, smaller, scarier, safer. And when that happens without context, without clarity, it stops being information and starts being manipulation. So be curious, ask questions, demand context, because 100% of confusing statistics look a lot less impressive when you understand what they actually mean. Coming up next, the one number you should trust, and why your personal experience might be more meaningful than all the pie charts combined.
The number you really should trust. Let's start with a confession. After all these chapters, all this statistical drama, all the misleading graphs and suspicious pie charts, there is one number that actually matters more than most. It's not a percentage. It's not a p-value. It's not some megadata model trained on 1 billion clicks. It's the number one, as in one person. You. Now hold on, this isn't some vague self-help moment. We're still talking about statistics, but we're going to look at them from the other end of the telescope. Because while most statistics deal with crowds, patterns and averages, you're not a statistic. You're a sample size of one. And sometimes, that's the most honest data you've got. Let's unpack this slowly. The world is built on generalizations. Marketing teams, policymakers, advertisers, they all use group data to make decisions. It's efficient. It's useful. It also leaves a lot of us out. Ever bought a best-reviewed mattress and then hated it? Or tried a trending meal plan that everyone swore by, but it made you feel like a tired raccoon? That's the gap between group data and personal experience. Statistics can tell you what's likely, but they can't tell you what's true for you. Let's say a drug has a 90% success rate. That's great for the group, but you're not a group. You're a person who might be allergic to one of the inactive ingredients. Your body didn't read the study. Or maybe a school gets ranked 1. Fantastic, but your kid thrives in smaller classes. Less pressure. A school with bells and whistles and 3D printed cafeteria trays might still be the wrong fit. Even something as basic as sleep, the recommended 8 hours, is based on averages. Some people feel amazing after 6, others need 9. Some people sleep 8 and still wake up like a medieval ghost. Your experience isn't an outlier, it's your reality. And in a world drowning in data, it's easy to forget that.
We get hypnotized by charts. We trust the group more than ourselves. We ignore what our own bodies, brains, and instincts are trying to tell us. Now, this doesn't mean we should throw out science. Please don't go full anti-vax yoga crystal mode. Group data is essential. It tells us what's generally safe, what's likely to work, what's worth trying first. But then you have to listen to the second half of the equation, because real wisdom comes from blending the two, the general and the specific, the study and the self. Try the thing that works for most people, but if it doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're specific, and being specific is not a flaw, it's your feature. Let's take food for example. Nutritional studies love big claims. This food lowers cholesterol, that one boosts metabolism, but those results vary wildly from person to person. What if you're genetically predisposed to process carbs differently? What if your gut biome thinks kale is a personal attack? No spreadsheet in the world can know how your unique blend of cells, emotions, and sleep-deprived decisions is going to react. So track your own patterns, pay attention, gather your own data. You don't need a lab, you just need a notebook, or an app, or a few quiet minutes to notice how you feel after certain foods, habits, or interactions. That's data. It's soft, it's anecdotal, but it's yours, and it might be the most powerful kind you'll ever use. Even in relationships, people throw around statistics about love and dating, divorce rates, average age of first marriage, number of texts before ghosting. But does any of that matter if your relationship feels right or wrong? Of course not. Human connection doesn't care about sample size. So here's a radical idea. Maybe the number you really should trust isn't some national average. Maybe it's not even a number. Maybe it's your lived experience. What feels right? What's working? What isn't? You don't have to justify it with citations. You don't need a graph. You just need a little space to believe that your experience counts, even if it's just a data point of one. Statisticians might scoff, methodologists might roll their eyes, but that's okay. They don't live in your body. And when all the pie charts fade away, all the flashy headlines lose their shine, what you're left with is your own quiet truth. The world is loud with numbers, but you don't have to let them drown you. You can respect the data, honor the science, and still listen to yourself. That balance, that's where the magic lives, and that's the one number worth trusting. Coming up next, we'll wrap everything up in a soft blanket of sleepy insight, with a dreamy reflection on storytelling, curiosity, and why uncertainty might be the best bedtime story of all. Sleepy summary and gentle exit. So here we are, after thousands of words, dozens of statistics, and probably a few yawns, we've arrived at the soft, quiet end of this story. It's been a journey through the tangled, hilarious, sometimes maddening world of numbers, and if you're still awake, well done. And if you're already asleep, that's fine too. That was kind of the point. Let's take a deep breath together. Not because the data says breathing reduces stress, though it does, just because it feels good, and sometimes that's enough. Now, let's wander through what we've learned, gently, dreamily, like flipping through an old photo album where all the pictures are pie charts in pajamas. We started with the illusion of certainty, how numbers, especially percentages and graphs, wrap themselves in authority. They whisper, "Trust me, I'm math." And we do, even when they're lying through very well-designed infographics. We met the mythical average person. Turns out they don't exist. Especially not in Air Force cockpits, or clothing sizes, or on dating apps. We learned how sampling errors can ruin predictions, like how an old magazine once confidently called the wrong US president based on postcards from rich people. We saw how tiny risks like shark attacks feel bigger than they are, while big risks like falling off your own socks get ignored. We met the concept of framing, how 90% survival sounds comforting, while 10% mortality sends us spiraling even though they're the same thing. We poked fun at rankings, top 10 lists that turn personal taste into pretend objectivity. Best coffee, best city, best socks, all subjective, all sold as science. We peeked behind the scenes of scientific research and found p-hacking, cherry-picking, and publication bias, the sneaky gremlins of academia. We dipped our toes into the math of miracles, how improbable things happen all the time when you have billions of chances. We played the Monty Hall game and learned how our brains struggle with probability, especially when there are goats involved. We tackled coincidence and the birthday paradox, discovering that weird doesn't always mean significant. We explored correlation and causation, the eternal comedy duo that confuses everyone. Remember, just because two things dance together doesn't mean one's leading. We ventured into the animal kingdom and found pigeons that outsmart humans, bees that dance directions, and dogs that know more about game theory than your last Tinder date. We challenged medical averages, learning that normal doesn't always mean healthy, and that designing care for the average person might be dangerous for everyone. We stared into the algorithms of big data and saw both brilliance and absurdity, from predicting flu outbreaks to suggesting you buy cat food because you watched a documentary about lions. We questioned the phrase "most people," a statistical smokescreen that usually means people who agree with me. We exposed misleading graphs, the liars with nice fonts, and reminded ourselves to always check the axes before panicking. We leaned into uncertainty and found out that not knowing is not the same as being wrong. It's just being honest, being open, being human. We unpacked dangerous percentages, those sneaky little numbers that sound impressive but often leave out the fine print. And finally, we came full circle, back to the number one. You, your experience, your lived reality, not as an outlier but as a fully valid, self-contained sample of truth. So now what? Now we let go, not of curiosity, not of critical thinking, but of the pressure to know everything, to solve everything, to find certainty in a world that was never designed to be certain. We embrace the idea that sometimes learning is more like stargazing than solving a puzzle. You don't need to understand every constellation to appreciate the sky. You don't need to memorize every statistic to spot a misleading one. And you definitely don't need to have all the answers to ask a really good question. So let yourself float in the maybe, drift through the what-ifs, wrap yourself in the fuzzy comfort of I don't know, but I'd like to, because that, truly, is the spirit of science, of curiosity, of storytelling. We don't tell stories because we have the facts. We tell stories because we need them, to make sense, to feel connected, to rest. And maybe that's the real point of this video. Not just to teach you about statistics, but to give you a place to land. A slow, soft place where data becomes dialogue, where skepticism and wonder can hold hands, where truth isn't sharp, but warm. And if you've fallen asleep somewhere along the way, that's perfectly okay. In fact, I hope you did, because numbers will still be here tomorrow. Pie charts will still be trying to mislead you. And somewhere out there, a pigeon is still pecking buttons, better than a grad student. But for now, let the graphs fade. Let the percentages drift into the background. You're safe. You're curious. And you're already wiser than you were 2 hours ago. Good night, friend. And may your dreams be full of kind numbers, gentle probabilities, and exactly zero misleading pie chart.